Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Sunday chat today is going to be sort of media, but why? I mean, obviously I've got quite a large collection, although some people have probably got more, and it varies, and it not only varies in genera, it varies in plant size and types within the genera as well. So there is a lot of variety, and they're not all potted the same. Obviously there's some mounted, and I'll include in there why sometimes I decide to mount and not pot, and other times I decide to pot and not mount. So we'll have a go through that. So that's the main thing. Obviously some news items will be included, and and for those of you who are stopping for the rest of the video, which hopefully is most of you, if you haven't already subscribed, please think about doing so, and don't forget the old thumbs up. They all help the channel's view from YouTube, looking at the channel. At the moment the channel seems to be doing okay. It's growing slowly but surely, which is all we can hope for. That's all any of us can hope for. And here for the long term with any luck. So let's get going with today's Sunday chat. Right, hopefully today, change the angle round. If you look out of the window, you can see some bright bits. That's actually sunshine. It's not the sunshine that I'm on about, it's the fact it comes down between the two houses and into the garden. And now that it's getting higher in the sky, it's starting to light up parts of the garden. And it's starting to become very apparent that that huge evergreen tree all along there needs cutting back, because that's going to let my light in, which will enable parts of the garden to get a lot more sun. It'll help dry them out from when from when we've had heavy rain and things like that. So it's a bonus anyway. So that needs looking at, that all that evergreen stuff along there. But I'll have to go careful when I'm sort of cutting that down. It doesn't belong to me, so I can only deal with what overhangs, and I'll go and ask. But in amongst there is a wisteria, all those dead stick bits that you probably can't see. That's a wisteria. Now that's probably going to look quite stunning when that comes out. I've got to make sure that stays, and then that needs pruning the correct way, because there's some things that put on a lot of growth. You prune them after they've bloomed, sort of later in the year, and other things you need to prune like before they even start growing. So because they bloom on the new growth, not on the old growth. So I'll have to find out which way round those are. Somebody might tell me. Some news, not a lot really. I've spoken to the probate people and they've said that's all progressing, they're not waiting on anything, and we should hear from them first or second week in February, that's nearly here now. The estate agents and solicitors on that side of the fence, they've updated the case status to awaiting probate. So it sounds like everything else is in place. Two solicitors have obviously talked to each other. Apparently the searches are in. So everything's progressing quite nicely for the final exchange of contracts and then completion when the house is sold. My two sisters should be clearing out the last of the remaining stuff to come out of the house and clearing the shed out and all that sort of stuff this weekend, hopefully. And hopefully I've got Tony coming round, my eldest son, on either Wednesday or Thursday, and we will go round and get the things that I want out of the garden, which includes some plants to be dug up. They can just go in pots for now. Some plants that are in tubs, my large maple tree that's in a very big tub, which is why I want Tony, because there's no way I'm going to lift that. Hopefully it will fit in the car. If it won't fit in the car, I'll prune it, because it will grow again. It's a tree at the end of the day. And then I've got my tree that has the early blossom on the bare branches that is it's a bit special, that one, because that's the tree I chose for growing for Josh, for Rachel, when her son died. So there's no way that's getting left there. And then obviously the bonsai trees, they'll come back round. And I think what I might do is the garden furniture, the metal table and the 4 chairs, I don't really want them round here, but if that table fits in the car, I will bring it, simply on the grounds it's a very useful thing to repot the bonsai on. It gives me a work surface, if you see what I mean, out in the garden. And it would also house a couple of the bonsai, you know, get them up off the ground away from the slugs and snails and all that sort of stuff, and raise them up a bit. So, yeah. So if it'll go in the car, I'll bring that back round. So yes, so by the end of next week the house could be over and done with. Tony's going to give me a hand to clear the old grow room out, so everything's got to come out of there, bubble wrap off, all the wiring, all the electrics have got to come out, and then give it a good sweep down, clear up the floor sort of thing, and then that's done. Because my sisters didn't want anything to do with that, and well, they shouldn't do, that was my stuff, wasn't it? So yeah, so we're getting there. I've got no new blooms, nothing at all, not new, nothing you haven't seen before, so you can bypass that bit then. There's things to come. I mean, I'm quite looking forward to the Dendrobium in fundibulum coming into bloom. That's got 2 nice big buds pushing on. My Noblies have got nubbins just showing, all of them I think, so that's not so bad, and one of them has actually got buds forming, so that one's a little bit more advanced. But yeah, not much else going on, not really. Right, media. Media for me, obviously we're talking pots now, not mounts, but I'll have a chat about those. Media for me is also geared up to pot size, and pot size is determined by the type of plant and the root vigour and the type of roots. So I'm not just choosing a pot, I'm choosing an environment, what I call below ground. And quite honestly, with most orchids that aren't mounted, very few that are, most of your problems are below ground, not above ground. I mean, unless you've got a harsh environment that's not suitable for growing orchids, then nearly all the problems will be below ground. And they come into several categories. One, totally unsuitable media for the plant, the actual type of plant and its type of roots. Media that's breaking down and going off, basically, which you shouldn't have. And just the wrong size pot. And that really is not geared up to the pot. It's not the pot's fault, and it's not your fault for choosing that pot. But it goes in with your habits rather than the pot. So you have to decide what sort of waterer you are before I go on with the conversation about media and pots and the root types and everything, because it's all linked in together, quite honestly. Along with your own environment, your temperatures, your humidity, it's all linked together. It's not just a subject you can isolate. But you've got your watering type. Now, if you work, you grow in the home and you work and you can only water at the weekends, then you have to stop and think that your plants, depending on the type, have got to last that long, because they're not going to get anything in the gap. If you can only water once a week, that's all you can do, then your plants have got to last that long. So now you need to step back and think, now hang on, what sort of plant have we got here? Have we got a plant that's supposed to dry in between waterings? Or have we got a plant that should stay constantly moist? Now we're getting down into why we select different medias and different pot sizes. Yeah? So if we had a plant that needs to dry in between watering, but not stay dry for any length of time, let's take our watering day as Sunday, so that we've got a benchmark. Sunday to Sunday. They've got to last until the next Sunday. They should dry out, but they shouldn't stay dry for long. So that media's got to stay with some moisture in it till at least Friday from Sunday. Yeah? So what sort of root system have we got? Is it a vigorous, strong root system? Is it going to pull the moisture out of the media? Yeah? Is it a relatively static root system that grows a few new roots each year with a new growth, like say one of the slower growing cattleyas? Yes, it produces new roots once a year, but that's all. Otherwise it stays relatively static. Well, it must dry out in between watering if that's the type of Cattleya laelia it is, and most of them are that way inclined. But you don't want it staying dry for too long, especially when it's growing. So you've got to choose a media for the plant. And then you think, well, hang on, if I choose my medium bark, yeah, and there's an awful lot of it, it could stay wet too long and the plant not dry out. So how do you reduce the amount? Bring the pot size down. Starting to click in with where I'm coming from now. Yeah. So it's not just the media, it's also the pot size. Now if you've got, we'll stay with the Cattleya for a while because they are of a type that ought to dry in between waterings. That's quite vigorous and puts up quite a few new growths each year, and they're not all at the same stage. Then you've got root activity a lot of the year. And although it still needs to dry in between waterings, it shouldn't stay dry for long because it's a vigorous plant and it needs that input to keep that vigour going, otherwise it will stall. So again, you stop and think, well, if I use my medium bark with this, it's going to be dry by Wednesday. And then it's got to last till Sunday. That's not good, is it? So how do we make the bark stay wet longer? Well, if you live here in my environment, you chuck the coconut husk in with it, because that holds quite a bit more moisture and will keep the pot moist longer. So we've now switched from just bark to bark and coconut husk. Yeah? And again, how big a pot do you want? You know, is how vigorous are the roots? Are they big, thick, fleshy roots? How long do I want that dry period to be? This is all the thought that goes into each pot. Not just the plant type. You think, right, let's go the other end of the scale now and pick, say, a Masdevallia. Now, the books and the ancient scrolls and stuff like that will say continuously moist. Well, first of all, what's moist? It's not wet and it's not dry. It's somewhere in between. Yeah? Well, that in the real world can only happen for a short space of time, and you can't create that, because if you water it, it's wet. And then after a while it becomes moist and then it becomes dry. That's just how things work. So constantly moist sounds like, oh hang on, perhaps if I just give it a trickle every now and again. You need to go careful with that thing, because the continuously trickling water into media, the chances are it will end up soggy, and it'll end up, I would class that as heavy watering. And that's not how the plants are in the wild. They might be in montane forests where everything's dripping wet all the time, but when it rains, and it washes everything clean. It washes everything through. Well, if you keep dribbling into a pot, it's never getting flushed through. It's never getting the effect that rain would have on it. So that's not perhaps such a good idea. But if we took a Masdevallia, with this silly expression, constantly moist. Now in my book, what that means is I can chuck as much water as I like in that pot, and it will last for a fair while, but eventually it will start to dry and head towards dryness. But it should never really get there when it's actively growing. So it should head towards dryness. Now, media reacts differently. If we put a Masdevallia in medium bark, bearing in mind a lot of them have got fine root systems, but some of them actually have fleshy roots. Decision yet again. Fleshy root ones need a bit more space around them. So larger bark, for instance. Very fine rooted ones, perhaps finer bark. But if you find your bark, whichever one you've chosen, don't forget you can mix them, just because it says medium in that bag and small in that bag, you can put half and half, or 2/3 and a third, you know, you mess with this to get it the way you want it. And the way you want it is that when you come round to Sunday to water, it just about needs it. It's not gasping, it's not dust dry, and it's not still soaking wet from the previous Sunday, out of order, too wet for too long. That water's stale. It's been in there a week. It's had no new oxygen. It's just stale water, and this is what doesn't happen in the wild because rainwater refreshes it all. So pots that stay wet too long are not a good idea. So when we get to Sunday and we pick up our Masdevallia, it should be relatively light and it should be almost dry. Now if it was dry on Wednesday, by Sunday it's going to be dying. If it's in active growth, it's not good. So your pot needs to hold moisture right up to that point. Now there's a nice thing that happens with the cocoa husk, and it happens with the smaller bark pieces as well, is that it dries quickest from the outside of the pot and the top of the pot. Because the roots are using that bit. That's where the roots normally are, around the outside of the pot. Where aren't they? A lot of the time they're not in the middle, are they? That bit is normally still wet. And you often find when you go to repot, you know, I like to repot dry. I like to use dry media as well. So you turn your pot upside down and all that dry bark and stuff falls off, and then you look and you think, actually the middle of the pot's still wet. And then some people think, why are my roots always dead in the middle of the pot? Yeah? Well, if you're trying to keep the outside and the top of the pot moist all the time, the middle of the pot's soggy. Yeah? So how do you stop the middle of the pot getting soggy? Remove the middle of the pot. How do you remove the middle of the pot? Make the pot smaller. Well, now we're back to not only media, but pot size. And therein lies your secret with your Masdevallias. If you can only water once a week, and you like the media that you use, and the plant's happy in it, and this, that and the other, but it seems to dry out a bit too quickly, up the pot size by 1. Now it'll stay wet a bit longer. Yeah? If it's still soaking wet on the Sunday, get your pot size down. Yeah. So those are the adjustments to help your watering problem. Now they say, you know, oh, oncidiums do much better in a small pot. Well, again, they like to be drained. They like to get wet and the water's gone. It doesn't hang around for any length of time. No soggy roots, no soggy pots. They like to be watered well and then head towards dryness quicker than quite a few other plants. So by having a smaller pot, certainly in the warmer weather when they're growing, you could water them every day and they're not wet because they're using it. And therein lies with the small pot, they will use it. But that's geared up to the watering more than the size of the pot. Yeah, because if they were in a bigger pot, providing it wasn't big enough that they just stayed wet all the time, if they were in a bigger pot and you could only water once a week, that might be just the job. You see what I mean? Because it means that you water on your Sunday, and by the time it gets to sort of Friday, Saturday time, they need some more water. Well, if you had your oncidium in that small pot when it was actively growing and you watered it on Sunday, it would probably want some more on Tuesday and some more on Thursday. And you're not there. They're not going to get it. So perhaps they don't always do well in a small pot because it's not just the pot, it's how you water and how often you can water. And sometimes everything's got to be adjusted to suit you, not the plant. Yeah? Because that's all you can do, and if that's all you can manage, you've got to work with that. Yeah. Now some people choose to water once a week because that's just the way they work. They've always done it like that, but that's fine, and I'm sure it works well for them. I don't water once a week, but what I do is I split my plants into sets and then try and get all of the plants in that set to need watering at roughly the same time, and it's contrived and I have to work at it. You know, I have my cooler, shadier types. Well, those are the types that under normal circumstances shouldn't go dry, not totally dry. They should still have some dampness in that pot when you come to water. Now, I've got plants that come into that category are Miltoniopsis. Now, that one there is in quite a big pot. It's a vigorous plant. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 new growths pushing on at the moment. They're not pushing on that fast because of the short days. But it's also got quite a lot of roots. And I've just picked that up and it nearly flew up to the roof. It's watering day for them today. Now they won't get done today, they'll get done tomorrow. But that's in the cocoa husk. So I know that although that looks a bit dry on the top and a bit dry around the sides where all the roots are, I know that's still damp in the middle of the pot. So there is moisture in that pot, but it's not wet. So when that gets watered, that'll be fine. And then I've got, that's also quite a fleshy rooted Miltoniopsis. Well, what about one that's not fleshy root one then? What about one like this that's got a finer root system, much smaller plant as well? If that plant was in that size pot, it would probably never dry unless the weather really was warm, because the root system would never fill that pot, not from a small plant like that. So that's got a small pot to accommodate the fact that it's a small plant, and when it was put in there it had hardly any roots. So now it's got some roots. Again, that's in coconut husk, because I don't want the atmosphere in that pot to go totally dry. If that was in bark, that would go totally dry, or could if I let it. Yeah. Ugh. What else have we got then? Let's grab something else. Let's grab. I don't want to start getting stuff down in places I can't get at. Let's take something like this. This is one of my bigger Miltonias, so Oncidium type, right? Now, this is in a quite large pot, but it's a flat pot. And it's a flat pot because the way these bulbs work is they push out quite a mass of roots. But they don't grow extensively, but I bet if I put it on a mount they would, because they'd search for moisture. And if it was on a mount, a lot of those roots would be aerial, and they would probably become extensive. But in a pot, they don't seem to do that. Now this one is coming into growth, and it's, I won't say it's being silly, it's being rather good, because if you take this growth here, that one bloomed, I think. Yeah, dead spike in there. So that bloomed. Now look what it's doing. New growth, new growth, new growth. That's got 3 new growths coming on it. That's a plant in its own right, that piece. And, you know, just coming round here, the next one round here has got 2 new growths. The one round here has got 2 new growths. And so has this one. So all of the growths on here that bloomed, because this was quite a good show, this one, have now got at least 2 new growths, and one's got 3. So how much bigger is that plant going to be by the end of this season? Now look at where all the new growths are. They're just inside the edge of the pot. So where's the new root system going to go? Straight down in the pot. How vigorous is that going to be? When the longer days come, these shoots are going to kick off. They're growing quite slowly at the moment. You give that the longer days, and that's going to start kicking off. And that's going to be quite a massive root system. This one I will have to watch very, very carefully. Once we get to those longer days and this starts to push on harder, why will I have to be very careful with it? It's a shallow pot, and it's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 new growths producing new roots. So that's 9 new root systems. How full of roots is that pot going to be? How fast is it going to dry? What will happen to those new growths on an Oncidium type if it goes dry when it's in full flood? You get concertina leaves. So I'll have to be careful with that one. There's a whole set of them up there that they're all in the same boat. So that went in a big pot, but you notice it was in small bark. It did have some other stuff in there, but it was in quite a compact media. And that's because despite the size of the plant, it's a very fine root system. And it's a root system that doesn't like lots and lots of air around it. It likes to be touching stuff. It would do great on a mount, but you'd probably have to water it twice a day. Yeah, so that's that one. Right, my Cattleya types, they need a proper wet-dry cycle. So most of those, if they're not mounted, they tend to go in the clay pots with larger bark. But some of them have got some cocoa husk in with them, and they're the ones that have got the more vigorous root systems that are more vigorous generally speaking. And the reason they've got some cocoa husk in with them is to hold a bit more moisture than would be held by just the large bark. Large bark is just nearly all air, quite honestly. The bark is used for nothing more than anchorage. It's not going to hold much moisture at all. So the frequency of watering would have to be upped with those. So do we have a way of catering for that? I do. They get watered more frequently. They're a set, holy clay pot set. Date last watered, holy clay pot set. You know, and in the better weather, that frequency will be 3 to 4 days depending on heat. Yeah, when the longer day lengths and the growth kicks off. So 3 to 4 days there. Mounts will be 1 to 2 days. Cooler, shadier types, 5 to 6 days. Maybe 4 to 5 if we get a prolonged hot period, but I'm hoping that prolonged hot periods don't affect me as much here this year. And I might have to adjust some of my media selection this year, but until I've done this year and I've seen what happens in this environment, I can't do that yet. So it's a wait and see. I need to know what's going to happen in here and how hot it's going to get. I mean, I do have ventilation. I've got a door I can open and a window I can open, and I can use circulating fans to, you know, to move that air around. But I haven't got an extractor fan and an inlet fan anymore, and I can't have those. So I've got to work with what I've got, and at the moment it's unknown. But it was good to see the sun coming through into the garden in places. Very good. So right. What about larger plants? You know, I mean, a lot of the Masdevallia types and the Dracula types, they can be quite small plants, but some of them can grow into pretty big, you know, bushes basically. Well, again, you know, the pot should suit the plant, and I always sort of think that when you, like with bonsai, the pot is an integral part of the whole look of the plant. And when you look at a bonsai in a pot, if you're looking at the pot, it's wrong, because you should be looking at the tree, and the pot is just like an also-ran. If the pot's dominant, chances are it's either silly small, and you just sort of think, oh, that looks silly in that tiny little pot, or it's too big. You know, the bucket principle. Why have they planted that in a bucket, sort of thing? And it's I sort of look at plants the same way, orchids the same way. You know, that's in far too big a pot for the type of plant. Or, crikey, that's bursting at the seams. Now, an orchid in a pot that's bursting at the seams is great if the media is relatively new, because you can just lift it out, put it in a bigger pot with fresh media around the outside. But if that media is starting to go off, you can't do that, because it's taking the roots down already. Now, you might give those roots somewhere new to go, but the centre of the pot is always going to have rotting media in it, and that decay will start getting at the new media far, far quicker than the new media would on its own. So go steady with potting on. Not always the best ideas. Right, choice for mounting orchids. There are some orchids that it's just deemed to do better on a mount or in an open basket, because quite honestly that is so similar to a mount it's hardly worth differentiating. You can have, have I got any around? Yeah. You can have these sort of things. Just knocks that top heavy plant over again. Of course that's something else as well. My sister's cleared out You know, when I used to work in the kitchen time in the other place, I used to sometimes turn round and get a steak. Well, there was a cupboard behind me that the boiler's housed in, and they cleared it out. And that also included my secateurs and my pruning saw. So I haven't got any steaks now. So thanks for that, girls. But they're doing a job that I didn't want to get involved with. Little open baskets like that. Now, being an open basket and not a clay pot, it's got a cat litter in it, is that going to dry faster than a clay pot? Yes, quite a bit faster. So what's that got in it to help hold the moisture longer? It's got very large pieces of bark and they're rock solid, so they're not going to hold any moisture. So I've put some Welsh moss in there. That holds moisture longer. But I've still got my wet dry cycle and I've still got lots of air around the roots when it decides to grow some. In that case, it will. Coming soon. Yeah, so an open basket like that is so similar to a mount it could be almost deemed the same thing. Now if you look at Lynn's collection, she's got Masdevallias and Draculas growing in those sorts of things. Yeah, so she's got Masdevallias growing in open baskets. I suspect they have to be watered quite frequently compared with her Masdevallias in the pots. Yeah, so if you were trying to gear up growing things for your lifestyle, those are the things you have to bear in mind. If you're growing in the home, you're going to struggle with mounted orchids, quite honestly, unless you make arrangements. And by arrangements, I mean extra humidity. But if you can only water once a week, you're not going to do very well with mounted orchids. You're going to need a huge amount of moss on the root ball to actually keep them moist long enough. And therein lies your variable. On a mount, you can go from no moss to lots of moss. That's your variable, yeah? And no moss, some plants will go quite happily. I've got plants growing with no moss that once upon a time had some, but they only had a little bit, and the plant's just outgrown that little bit. It's buried behind the plant now, so it looks like it's bare rooted. There was some moss there once. But yeah, you can go from a small amount of moss to a larger amount of moss. Then there's your choice of moss. You've got the zombie moss, the dried dead stuff, that if you use on a mount, why it gets called zombie moss is it goes green, it's algae, but it looks like it's come back to life. And in some very rare cases it actually does, you know, the treatment does actually miss a bit now and again. I've had some of that actually start to grow, but it's very rare, it's dead really. The treatment is such that it's gone, ceased to be. Nonetheless, it's not a bad media, but it compacts quite easily. Now on a mount, less so. In a pot, more so. Because in a pot, it's got sides and a bottom, and you pour water in and that water compresses. On a mount, it flows through. So it doesn't tend to compact so much on a mount. But you can use live moss. There's lots of different types of live moss that are suitable. The live sphagnum that I can collect in this country doesn't work very well. It squashes down. It hasn't got enough substance in it, as you know. There are loads of species of sphagnum moss, and the ones that I've got access to, I've tried and they don't work. However, there are different types of live moss that I can get, and quite honestly, I mean, it's a lot of my live moss on mounts at this time of year doesn't look that great. Well, it doesn't look that great because they're not getting watered very often. I've got short days and very cool nights. But I mean, that's in live moss, that one. That's a little twinkle. Now that moss is dry. Well, it's watering day tomorrow, not today. Tough. It's not growing at the moment. You know, it's okay. It's pushed a spike out and it's opened its blooms, but it's not growing. There's no new growths yet. They will come soon. And that doesn't need disturbing this year because the moss is live moss. It's not going off. So providing the mount's not breaking down, which in this case it's rock hard, so that's okay. But that's a type of live moss that's quite fine, and I can get loads of that. That is readily available for me. There's a place that it's got quite acidic soil, If it wasn't for the forest, it would be heathland. But like most heathland, if you leave it long enough, you will start getting pine trees and birch trees and things. It will eventually go back to forest. But of course, it's a very special environment, heathland. There's lots of things dependent on it. So a lot of the heathland is managed, and they have a tree pull every couple of years. So as the seedlings get a hold and they get up to about 2 foot high, they just go round and yank them all out of the ground and keep the heathland open. You know, virtually all of our reptiles dwell on heathland. Some of our amphibians in the waters and ponds and things, but yeah, it's a track that I can go to. One side is heathland and bog, quite dangerous actually. Some of those what look like a bit of sphagnum on some water are actually 6 foot deep. You can go down, you know, and they're not easy to get out of. But the other side of the track has been allowed to go to forest, and every now and again they thin the forest to let the light in, otherwise it becomes a dark, dank place and all the trees start dying off up to the top. So they're not as vigorous because they haven't got as many branches that can see the light. So every now and again they go and thin them out, so you get stumps, and those stumps get covered in moss because they're in quite heavy shade, and that moss just lifts off. So you're not tearing it to pieces. So that's one sort that I get. And then I've got the Welsh moss, which is a recent acquisition. There's something handy that's in Welsh moss, which is a very, very coarse moss. There's some up there. So you can see that is a very coarse moss. Yeah? And I'm pleased that I've managed to come across this, because this is brilliant for mounts that need a faster wet-dry cycle that also still need some air around their roots, like cattleyas. That's a brilliant media for cattleyas on a mount. Brilliant. They've got the air that they need, you've got the wet-dry cycle, and they've still got the ability to have some moisture around them for a day or two before they start to dry. But you can't compact that moss. It's so coarse it can't be compacted. It just stays solid. It just stays loose. Total opposite to solid. Yeah, it's because my coffee isn't getting drunk, it's getting held as usual. So there we go. When you go to repot a plant, whether you've just bought it or somebody's given it to you and you want to get it in some new media, you've decided you're going to repot, and you've had a good look at it, and you're either doing it, one, because it's outgrown a pot and it's starting to hang over the sides, two, the media's breaking down, or three, it's in the wrong media for you. So you may have bought something home from a shop or from a nursery that's in the right stuff for where it was, but it's not the right stuff for where it is now. So you need to change it. But unless you have a very good reason not to, you've obviously waited until there's some signs of some new root growth, because you're going to disturb the current root system. And with orchids, they replenish as part of their lifestyle. So they grow new bits, and new bits push out new roots. That way the older bits can die back eventually, sometimes slowly, sometimes quite quickly, and if they lose those roots it doesn't matter, because they know there's some more coming down the line, so they'll be okay. And that's how I like to think, you know, have I got a new root system either just starting or I know it's about to happen? That way, if I disturb my old root system and the plant can hang on a little while, it's going to get a whole new set, and that new set will go into the new stuff, not into the old stuff. So the plant shouldn't be set back much, and it should progress nicely. So when you come to do that, you know your lifestyle, you know your watering frequency. The thoughts you now need to add in is type of root system, fine root system, medium root system, big fleshy thick roots. Choose a media that suits those. Next choice, not instead of, alongside, is what type of plant have I got here? Have I got one that needs a fast wet-dry cycle, like Tulumnias, Cattleyas? They do best with that type of thing, yeah? You treat a twinkle like a Tulumnia, it's probably not going to do very well, because first of all it shouldn't dry that fast. You know, give it a chance to take some in. Tulumnias are adapted. Their root systems, they grab water as soon as it's there, basically. They've adapted to take full advantage of any moisture that's near their roots as fast as possible, because it might not be there long. So yeah, type of root system, and then type of watering habit that it needs. Does it need to stay moist most of the time? You know, like wet and then head towards dry. Is it one that needs to be soaking wet and dry quite quickly, or somewhere in between? And that's where you start thinking about the media to go with the root system, to go with the pot size for your watering frequency. So you're contriving it basically to suit you. Why not? You can't always suit the plant. Now I can most of the time because I'm here. I don't do much, I don't go off anywhere, and this is my thing. So I'm around, but even I don't go that mad. I'm not watering at individual plant level, I've got my sets. And my sets are my mounts, that's set number 1, they need the most attention. But quite honestly, now that I've got them on these racks, and I've got my moss trays underneath to catch the drips, I can water these more than twice as fast as I used to. So I can do them more frequently without getting ratty. You know, I won't do them again, you know. Got other things to do, like snooze in the chair, you know. It's called retirement. Yeah, so I can now water these a lot quicker because literally I pick one up, water it, put it straight back. I don't have to find somewhere to hang it, and I don't have to go and get it and put it back later. They just go straight back where they came from. So that's good, that's a bonus. So that's set number 1, most frequent. Set number 2, holy clay pots, second most frequent. And then my ordinary pots, third most frequent, and then the cooler, shadier types, fourth most frequently. And that's mainly because they're in a media that doesn't dry fast, because they shouldn't go totally dry. And I water accordingly. So yeah, some thoughts on your choices of media. You notice I don't use inorganic media, that's not my thing. That's perfectly successful for people, and the semi-hydro idea, the sort of leca beads or things like that with a little reservoir in the bottom, might be just the job for people who can only deal with their plants once a week. Not all plants will take to it, but most will, given half a chance. It's the main problem I've found, that I don't know because I don't do it, but listening to others, the main problem is the transition period. It's the period when you're taking them out of what they were in, coming from the shop or the nursery or whatever, and setting them up in their semi-hydro or inorganic sort of environment. Because a lot of orchids, their existing root systems don't like change. I mean, if you take aerial roots on a plant and try and cram them in a pot, the chances are they'll die because they adapted as aerial roots and that's what they're used to. New roots will be fine, yeah? But that transition, it can be a problem, you know, especially if you do it at the wrong time, basically. Yet again, I suppose the best time to do it is when new roots are coming, because they'll go straight into your environment, you know, your leca beads with the reservoir tray. That's the only thing they've ever known. So they will either do with it or die. But you're not trying to change them, because it's the change that seems to be the problem. You know, you're taking them out of well, things like that you know, that cocoa fibre stuff that a lot of the shop bought plants come in now. Well, and some from nurseries because they bought them from the same places. But that's a very, very compact, very fine media like that. If you take that away and put them in what is a very open media, like the leca beads, because they're round and they've got lots and lots of spaces, those roots will feel lost. It'll just feel wrong. So again, it would pay to wait for some new ones. What else can you think about? Ways to keep a pot moist longer. Use the media that you want to use and put some moss around the top. and the moss will stop the media evaporating its water so fast. It'll hold it in, and you can help that by spraying the moss. Yeah, so you can keep that. Can help some plants as well getting their roots down into the media, because it's like I've said, roots will search out moisture except for some oncidium types who've got one of those bracts at the bottom, so they can't get at the moisture, they can only go up. And if you let them go up and come out the top, they won't ever get to the media, because if you try and bend them down, they'll snap. So get the roots to go downwards if you can. But yeah, some moss on the top of your bark mix or whatever you've got will help hold the moisture in, and it gives you an area that you can spray, and the moisture from the live moss around the base of the plant will encourage root growth, because it's a very fine environment. The moisture is only just there, 2 inches above it, it's been lost, it's just mingled in with the normal air type. So yes, so media and stuff, and that'll do for today. I ought to do my cooler, shadier set today. I might actually do that, because I think I don't got a clue what the time is. Where's the clock? No, it's 11:30, perhaps not. But yeah, the Sunday chat video always goes onto YouTube twice. It goes once as an unlisted one with no ads or monetization or anything, and the link from that one goes onto the Patreon site. And I do that one first, so those that know that happens get an earlier viewing, and it's ad free. That's the idea of the Patreon, and I will get some goodies over on that site soon. If you're interested in being a subscriber in that manner, actually making a contribution to keep the channel going, the link is in the description. And yeah, I'm pleased with the patrons I've got. They seem to be staying there. I'm sure some people have forgotten they ever joined, and then they get a reminder every month when it comes off their credit card bill or however they pay. But yeah, I've ordered, you'll be pleased to hear, a bird table. So outside of the kitchen window and outside of here is going to be a bird table, and that's going to become part of me. Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in our wild birds. I've been asked sometimes, sort of driving along and go, oh look, it's a red kite. How the hell do you know that's a red kite? It's a dot in the sky. Well, because it is. I'm not very good at estuary birds and seabirds, because I don't go to those environments, but the woodland, the farmland and the garden birds, I know them all. And yeah, there are quite a lot around here. Yes, a couple of interesting ones I've seen as well. There's been some jays in the large tree out there, and there's been goldfinches and greenfinches in that tree, and firecrests and a nuthatch. So there's quite a lot of woodland nearby and farmland just over there. So it's a mix of birds around. So let's get them in and set the camera up and have a look at some of the birds that come to the bird table. And I'll get some hanging feeders as well, but I want those dry and clean. There's a lot of disease being spread around from people who are not keeping their feeders clean and tidy. You get mould and all sorts of bacteria in the feed itself, and then it's actually harming the birds, so I don't want any of that. So I'll get some hanging bird feeders and fix them underneath the bird table so they can never get wet, and then the birds can hang off with those. So we'll get some of that set up. Coming soon. I've ordered it, but it's got to arrive, and I've got to put it together as well. It's a flat pack bird table. Anyway, another thought of some extra things going on in the garden. And as I said, the bonsai will be back soon, and some of those do need repotting. So as I said, if I can get that metal table that I've used before for repotting back here, I will. And that will give me a base to work on outside, where I need to do bonsai outside. I can't do those indoors. Mess is incredible. Well, you have to scrape with a curved fork effort to get the old media out of the tight root system, and that just flicks all over the place. I did try doing it indoors once. I spent a week cleaning up, so we're not doing that. Anyway, thanks for dropping by. Thanks for staying with me this long, if you have, because the Sunday one always ends up quite a while. And hopefully there's some food for thought in amongst that media chat. Like I said, it's a joined up thing. How fast your plants dry will be geared up to temperatures, light and humidity. Yeah, all those things are geared in there as well. But the actual pot itself is geared up to what you put in it, how often you can water it, and how big it is, and what type of media you've chosen for what type of root system. It's all joined in together. So have some thoughts in that area next time you get your media out and one of your plants set up ready to repot. Just put some of those thoughts in. Sometimes having the pot too big is the downfall of watering, because if you've only got that frequency once a week, Sunday, we're back to that Sunday again, if you've only got that and they're still soaking wet but won't last another week, you're going to water them, aren't you? And like I've said, there's no such thing as over watering, just watering too often, which is what you're doing, because then they're not being allowed to head towards dryness. So that can be the result of a large pot too large, can be the result of the wrong type of media for that plant, and it can also be the result of it's a perfect pot and it's a perfect media, but the plant hasn't got any roots yet, so it can't use the water up. Those you have to be very careful with. Anyway, see you again. I haven't got a clue what I'm going to be filming this week yet. I haven't even given it a thought, but we'll find something, I'm sure. Certainly film the bonsai when I'm getting back here, even though there'll be lots of twigs in a pot because they won't have any leaves on, apart from my conifer. Right, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.